Hello and welcome to Healing Tips from the Heart, Intuition with Helpers, Healers, and Guides. I am your host, Dr. Lori Hops, licensed psychologist, writer, and artist. I've explored mind, body, and spirit related to intuition, or your personal guidance system, since early childhood. Meet my guests who have learned from their personal and professional lives to explore vast realms of knowing, synchronicities, and overcoming challenges. Their stories may inspire you with tools to enhance your daily living and relationships. Hello, everyone, and welcome my special guest today, Dr. Stacy Dicker. Stacy has been a clinical psychologist in private practice for over 20 years. She's also taught courses for nearly 10 years at the University of Colorado at Boulder on eating disorders and adult psychotherapy for upper-level psychology majors. Dr. Dicker wrote a book called Psychstrology, Apply the Wisdom of the Cosmos to Gain Balance and Improve Your Relationships, and this book was published in 2019. It's about integrating the ancient archetypal knowledge wisdom system of astrology, which she'll be explaining about, and combining it with modern psychological approaches of healing and knowing ourselves and others. She also works with ancestral healing, including working with those across the veil, and this has changed the course of her life. She recently created, hosted, and produced the Boundless Psyche Timeless Soul Summit conference with 22 speakers who have shared their wisdom with the audience, the importance of bringing spiritual perspective to our individual and collective healing work. And I'd like you to know that I was part of that summit, which is how I met you, Stacy. You had reached out to me, and we had a conversation, and we're from the same organization, ASEP, which I talk about on my podcast quite a bit. And how fantastic, your first summit. And as we're talking right now, it's about to launch very soon, in a few days. But by the time this airs, it will be out and available. And I'm just so grateful that you're here today. Thank you for sharing with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lori. I so appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
So we were talking ahead about your work and what you do with astrology, and you really were so helpful educating me about the differences in this field. And so can you talk a little bit about what your specialty is and the way that you make this so relatable to people, because they may be confused about astrology or unfamiliar with it?
Yes, that's actually, I found that a lot, actually, that first of all, with my own self, when I would be trying to learn about it, just as a younger person, it was so overwhelming. There was so much. It's literally taken me decades to just, because I'm one of those people who likes to learn the basics and then, slowly build on that over time. I find if I try and jam too much, and I find this with my clients too. If we try and do kind of, whether I'm trying to remember too much about them too quickly, or if we're trying to do too much work too quickly, things need to just kind of progress in their own way. And astrology is massive. I mean, it's massive. It's just, there's so much to learn. It is a very complicated system. And people who have been astrologers for decades, I mean, God bless them. The kind of stuff that's in their heads, the kind of the quickness with which they can see connections of and just like spout stuff out. That is not me. I am not, first of all, I'm not trained as an astrologer. That's not, I wouldn't call myself an astrologer. I have training at this point. Was self-taught for decades, but for me, I'm a depth psychologist. So the way that I've used it is similar to how Jung used it. Carl Jung, I love Carl Jung. He's a big influence on my approach as a psychologist. And he studied astrology for 50 years. In fact, one of his kids became an astrologer, and she used to do the charts on his patients. And he wouldn't. So So when I learned that, it sort of emboldened me to feel more like, oh, I mean, it's fine for me to, like, I'm not necessarily, I didn't talk about it with clients for a long time, but it legitimized it that, this is honestly the way I think about astrology in general. And I'll get in a second to the specifics of your question, but astrology is ancient archetypal wisdom. It's been around for millennia, and anything that's been around for millennia, I mean, nothing has staying power unless there's truth to it. So there's something about it that has stood the test of time. And the fact that Jung saw that early on in his career, I mean, it just helped. I think there was something about realizing that this man had linked it. He was a psychologist, and he saw it as the first form of psychology, as our first attempts to understand people psychologically. And so the form of psychology that Jung used and that I use too is called psychological astrology, which is basically looking at the birth chart as a map of someone's soul's journey through life. And so rather than predictive astrology, which we were talking about before we started recording, predictive astrology requires that you have software and you run, some people can do it by hand, but you run transits and you're looking more at collective. You can also look at individual transits where you have someone's birth chart and you're looking at how what's happening now is playing out against their birth chart. But the kind of astrology that I do, that psychological astrology, is much more about really understanding ourselves, understanding the people who are close to us. I find that it has helped immensely with empathy in the way I was just describing, that you really kind of understand that someone else is kind of run by different core fears or drives, but also self-compassion, because it just helps you realize that, everybody's some way, and the archetypes of our birth chart are very telling about what our challenges are going to be. The stuff we'll have to use compassion to accept and help balance and get with. So I think it's very helpful in that way.
Oh, great. Thank you. So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that there's a couple different ways that the astrological chart, which is based on the position of the planets when you're born, if that's correct. It's like a map. And some people use it as a map, like for the future, like what's going to be my love life, or who's going to win the next election, or what are the trends in consciousness for the planet. So that's kind of like a predictive model. But what you're saying is it's also kind of like a psychological profile or personality awareness of different vibrational matches. I'm using that language now to look at like the profile of what were you born under, and how does that set some parameters or expectations for how you might go forward in life, what your perspectives are. Am I catching this drift?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep. It's a perfect way to put it. That astrology really provides a map, whether you're looking at one person's soul journey or the collective transits around big upcoming years and what's going to happen. So yeah, it's a perfect way to synthesize it.
And so we were talking a little bit about matches of people. You may not know like that you're drawn to someone, and it may be even like, I would think a negative draw, like I don't like that person, but also like a positive draw, I do. And it may be that your birth chart has something to do with those attractions and repulsions.
Two things that come to mind with your saying that. The first one is that people ask all the time, as soon as they find out I am into astrology or know anything about astrology, they want to know like who they're best with. They'll think like dating wise or friends wise, who am I best with? And my answer is the same every time, which is, there is something in astrology. They're called trines, or they're sextiles. They're about the angles that are made that are easier relationships. So like in astrology, the signs of each element tend to get each other in particular ways. But I don't answer that way usually, because my sense is that it's who are we drawn to and who's drawn to us. I think there's much more juice in that question and trying to answer that question, because it helps us make sense of, I really believe that everything is, there are lessons in everything and there are reasons, and medicine in everything. And that, so the signs that are showing up for us, sure, I do think that you can actually see in the birth chart, like, oh, it makes sense why this is more difficult, or it makes sense why this is easier because of these factors. But so the second point I wanted to make in response to that is that every close relationship that I know of has elements of ease in the way that I was just talking about, like trines are easy, but also in the context of difficult angles like squares, which are more tense, because in close relationships, growth is always such an important, it's like the most important aspect. And we know for a fact, you as a psychologist know this too, that growth really has to happen within the context of safety and ease, but that there is some kind of tension that has to sort of move it forward. We kind of shape each other by having that tension. We kind of help each other get better if there's some tension. So that's the thing, is generally there's both. In every close relationship we had, we can compare the charts and see, okay, well, these things are easy, make it easier. And that's great, because there's also this challenge that's got to have kind of a nice garden to grow in of ease, because there's going to be some work that gets done in the relationship.
Very true. True about life.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what do you say to the skeptics that say, well, how can an ancient system that didn't have the quote benefits of modern technology to understand how the planets move and so on, and the fact that the calendar has changed and that the position in the sky has changed, how can there still be truth to this plan, to the underlying foundation of what astrology is based on, which is where the planets are in relation to the Earth at the moment that you're born? And it's not just the month. It's not just like the 12 little comments on the newspaper. All
Correct.
Capricorns today, watch out, because you're going to get hot coffee spilled on you, Yeah.
Totally. That would be bad. I am a Capricorn, so
Sorry.
Good thing for me. I wouldn't pay much attention to any of those things. So yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So this may sound like I'm kind of off on a tangent, but this is what occurred to me when you were asking it. And so, I just finished a book recently called The Cygnus Key, and it was all about
the what?
The Cygnus Key, Cygnus. It's about, Cygnus is a constellation, and it's about a lot of things. It's one of those books that's like, you start it and it's a big, long journey. It's a big web. It's written by a guy named Andrew Collins, who is on like the History Channel a lot, because he's like an archaeologist. And so he wrote this book about, it's about a place in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Okay. Good. This helps. And then, but it's also it links in with Egypt and ancient Israel. It basically, so what they found is that the ancient people actually, the things that they constructed, the sites that were constructed, like at least 10 to 12,000 years ago, were in alignment with the stars and the constellations. And so that shows you that the ancient people were actually living much closer to the land and the cosmos and the cycles, and that deep, deep knowledge that is, so to bring it to your question, that's so needed right now. And so the fact that they saw order, they found, and when they reconstructed, because temples got reconstructed and pyramid stuff got reconstructed later, they would like build again, and they would allow for the changes in what had changed in the cosmos. That was part of what would maybe prompt the change, or at any rate, when they did the changes, they would account for the changes. So
if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is there was a deliberate rebuilding of structure to align with the planetary shifts over time.
So my impression is that, I don't know, I would necessarily say it was caused, like that the rebuilding came from the need to realign, but I will say that the rebuildings took into account the realignment that was needed.
I see. It could have been an earthquake or war,
sure,
destruction,
or being attacked and needing to flee quickly, and then everything was gone by the time they went back to rebuild.
It reminds me of how like the magnetics of our planet have changed over the last, I don't know, couple of decades. And so literally like the lines for airplanes to land tarmacs have to be repainted because the magnetics have shifted.
Wow,
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk around 2000 about, 2012 and the big changes and that, the magnetics of the earth are going to shift. And then, people are like, well, maybe, maybe not. And then like the news comes out about how these like, and then we get like animals beaching themselves because what their regular route of magnetic following is shifted. And so now they're winding up like in the wrong place, and they think at least that's part of the reason why some of the whales and stuff have been beaching themselves, not always, but sometimes because they're following the magnetic lines that are shifting. Yeah. So anyway,
By
I
the
don't want to
way,
get you off track,
no,
but
it's okay. It's funny that you say talking about getting me off track, because one thing I forgot to mention earlier that I would love to talk about, because I know you would too, is this is totally off topic of it. Well, not necessarily actually off topic of astrology, but animals and animal telepathy and animal intuition and synchronicity. So as you're talking about whales, you're reminding me because some of the astrology synchronicities that I have observed over the course of my life have involved my pets.
it involves
And
what? Sorry.
my pets, my
Oh, your
dogs.
pets. Okay, yeah.
Yes, yes. So just remind me at some point before we end to because it's just amazing to see the
Yeah.
synchronicities.
So, I mean, you can talk about that now. I don't know how much more you want to describe. Well, maybe you can talk about this, how your understanding of astrology has helped you in your relationships, including the ones with animals.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's helped me in every relationship I've had for since I was a teenager, honestly. I so like I was, I'll start with the relationship to myself first, because I do think that that's been the most that self-compassion thread has been so deeply, deeply important to me. And I think that that's a big part of why astrology found me, like, or I found it, that it was on my path so early, because I really actually needed a way to see myself that felt accurate. I didn't, unfortunately, I mean, love my parents, but they both had a lot of trauma. And so because of that, they did not, I don't feel like I was seen accurately, or it just didn't feel like I was gotten. And I do feel like astrology, I have said this before, that I said this in my own interview, actually, that I think it was probably part of my pre-birth plan that I had. My chart is not one of those that's really complicated. Like some people, you look at it and it's like, my husband's like this, they're polar oppositions. So like you see both, you see like, it's like, to just get one piece is not that explanatory. You need more of the chart to get it filled in. Well, for me, Capricorn has been it's a very prominent archetype in my chart. And I think that was that way because I think I was supposed to get early on that it was real, that it was accurate, because it really did help me. Even at a young age, for instance, it said Capricorns were serious.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been serious. I mean, I'd like to think I'm more fun, I mean, that's one of the things they say about Capricorns, actually, is that over the course of life, they tend to lighten up because they're, growing and working on it. But it helped me feel less, I don't know, weird, ashamed maybe of being serious. It really did help from a young age. And then as I got older, it helped with, shadow stuff, like, like, like Capricorns can be really focused on the goal, and can either make people feel minimized as they're on their way to the goal, or can get too focused to where their own joy is getting sucked out of them because they're so focused on the work and the goal. Those were important things for me I feel like those have been absolutely true through lines. So that's been really important. And then more recently, even just in the last 5 years, I feel like astrology really, maybe it was always this, and I just only could put two and two together and start really calling it this, but it feels like it was my gateway to spirituality. It showed me that everything made sense. It was ordered. It was way, and this sounds weird because I knew that in a way. Like I would feel like I was always understanding you could interact with people across the veil, for instance, people who are type. So like psychics, mediums, that kind of stuff. I always believed in that, but that's different than big picture.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like astrology really, it's like it becomes undeniable. When you really get how right it is, when you really get how synchronistically aligned everything is, it is, I mean, it changes everything. Then you do a summit like Boundless Psyche, Timeless Soul.
And you find other Capricorns, maybe.
That's funny. But so anyway, so I feel like that's the self piece. In terms of other people and my dogs, and clients, this has always been a very helpful explanatory. It feels like it's like Stan Groff calls it the Rosetta Stone of the human psyche. And I feel like you just can see when you know astrology to have some basic information about someone, human, canine, otherwise, it's like, oh, okay. Their behavior just sort of like, okay, like it comes into focus. That's how I would put it. Because when you have behavior, there's a principle in developmental psychology. I TA'd developmental psychology in graduate school like 5 times. So I know it really well, which is awesome because it's so helpful. So there's a principle called equifinality where you can arrive at the same place through multiple avenues. So like the outcome is the same. And I feel like in astrology, you don't know why someone, like you see a person show up how they show up, and you can't, if you know astrology, I find myself wanting to understand like what makes sense given what I'm seeing? How do I explain what I'm seeing? And so it really just sort of anchors it. Once you get what you're seeing, then you have a better sense of how to dance with that person, and just basic empathy makes your heart open up. When you realize that someone, so for example, with my clients or friends, loved ones, my husband, for instance, when someone has been traumatized and their tendency, given their moon sign, let's say, or their sun sign, the combination, all of it, there's something about that just really, just like couldn't have been otherwise. It couldn't have been otherwise. So I feel like it's been a very important, I don't want to call it a tool. That makes it sound it minimizes it so much. It's a giant system, and it's, nothing I could use really the way you could use a tool. You can't own it. It's so giant. But it's really been so helpful. And I think that's the biggest way. I mean, that's a lot of big ways, probably what I just said.
So, that's great. It's such an interesting thing. And I think that people who are watching and listening are thinking, well, they want to know how to find out what their sun and moon are, which is 2 of their main signs, or they already know what it is, but they want to know something either about themselves or someone else. So do you have kind of a quick snapshot to help people with that?
It's hard to give anybody, I can give a snapshot of the sun and the moon themselves, but it's really, there are 144 combinations just of that, because the position matters. There's so the zodiac wheel, I'll give some really basic background.
Thank
you. So the zodiac wheel is divided up into, it's 6 axes. It's 12 signs, but they are, 6 different axes. So pairs of signs is how you can really think about it. So the pairs are Capricorn, Cancer, and Libra, Aries. Those are the 4 cardinal signs. And I'll explain in a minute a little bit about cardinal, fixed, and mutable. But then you have Pisces and Virgo and Gemini and Sagittarius. And those are the 4 mutable signs. And then you have Taurus and Scorpio and Aquarius and Leo. And those are the 4 fixed signs. And so the fixed, I'll start with the fixed signs since I just said them. So the fixed signs tend to be pretty reliable. Every sign, well, every archetype, and the signs are archetypes, but every archetype, including the signs, has positive and negative poles. So there are wide range of expressions. This is why in predictive astrology too, you can't predict perfectly because there is a certain amount of, I mean, I think a bunch actually of space for free will and people's decisions and how they show up to the influences and what they choose. But so okay, the fixed signs tend to be in a good way. They are reliable. They get things done. They are they're expansive, let's say, in what they can hold. And so then there are the four mutable signs: Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces, and Virgo. And those guys are really good at their movement oriented. So they're constantly kind of going back and forth and tying up things, and they're really good in a crisis. They know just what to do. They're, you know, but in a bad way, I should have said this about the fixed signs. In a bad way, the fixed signs can get really stubborn, resistant to change, dug in, walled off. So in a bad way, the mutable signs can really lose themselves. They can be so in the moment of showing up with what's needed that they forget to worry about what they need and what they're very focused on the other. They can also tend toward codependence because of that. But they have a lot of positive traits too, obviously. And then the cardinal signs, Capricorn, Cancer, Libra, and Aries, those are the leader signs. They lead the season. All four of them lead the season they're in, and they're leaders in the sense that they kind of take charge. They like getting things done, and you know, like big picture. They think about the future and try and kind of get us there. But cardinal signs can be really focused on work and goals. Like I was saying before about Capricorn, Capricorn's a cardinal sign, so they can sort of get too focused on goals and get they can be kind of offensive in the way that they are trying to achieve what they're trying to achieve because they're so kind of laser focused on it. For instance, I mean, there are lots of negatives of all the signs, but they vary because, so there's another point, they are different elements. Therefore, the four ancient elements of air, water, earth, and fire. Each sign, there are three of each. So the three earth signs are Virgo, Capricorn, Taurus. The three water signs are not Aquarius. Aquarius is not a water sign.
Air.
Aquarius is an air sign. Yeah, I can't believe I never ever mess that up. But so the three air signs, or I'll say the three air signs next.
The way it's drawn, it looks like water.
Yes, it does. So people always think it's water.
So people get confused. So I'm glad you said it, because even though I know you know your stuff, I think you're picking up on the audience that gets confused. So now we can clarify about Aquarius that it's an air sign.
Thanks, Lori. That's so kind. It's true. Everybody messes that up. It's the water bearer. So it is, the glyph is the little water thing. So that's funny. So I'll stick with the water signs before I move into the air signs. So Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer are the three water signs. The three air signs are Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra. And then the three fire signs are Leo, Aries, and Sagittarius. And so to know each sign, and one more kind of category piece of feedback, background, is there are 6 signs that are masculine, 6 signs that are feminine. So the water and earth signs are the feminine signs of the zodiac. And then the masculine signs are the air and fire signs.
Interesting. I'm already like reworking my dynamics in my family based on what you just said about masculine and feminine. I wasn't aware of that.
That is one of the things. The masculine feminine piece is one of the more helpful pieces to know about, because your sun and moon archetypes, I didn't know this until recently, but the sun archetype, so in our culture, the sun is a masculine archetype because our culture is so masculine. This is what I didn't realize, is that in cultures that have been more feminine in their orientation, the sun has feminine traits in their culture, which I just find that so interesting, because I've always known it to be kind of the quintessential masculine archetype. Here.
Celtic, Chinese medicine, I think Ayurvedic also. So a lot of the prevailing world views about this sort of thing that we've been focusing on shows it that way. Father, sun, mother, moon, or mother earth, but also the mother, the dark, the cave
Yes.
is the feminine, and the
Yes.
field and the sun and the top of the mountain is the masculine.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that's how the sun and the moon are in our system. What you just said, the moon is feminine and the womb, it's the darkness, it's the quiet, it's the numinous, it's how we connect to our intuition. I mean, not that we don't connect through the sun, also we do, but there's a way that our moon sign and moon. So I should say this because I didn't make this clear so the sun, everybody knows their sun sign, but we all have a moon sign too. The moon was somewhere. I mean, everything was somewhere when we were born, but the moon is just as important as the sun. I think of them as together making a whole, like a yin yang whole. And so if you have a masculine, given that the sun is a masculine archetype in our culture and that the moon is a feminine one, if you have a masculine archetype in your moon position, if you have a masculine sign, air or fire sign in your moon position, and or earth or water sign in your sun position, there's an interesting way that just becomes another layer of what you're trying to take into account as you're trying to, because what you're trying to do from a psychological astrology standpoint is very similar to what IFS, Dick Schwartz talks about in IFS, because I've heard Dick Schwartz talk about having, he loves, he was reading in an interview I watched with him, he was reading the Red Book. He like held it up and said he was rereading it, actually.
And IFS, for those who don't know.
Thank you. Oh, I thought you were going to say it. Yes. IFS is Internal Family Systems with Dr. Dick Schwartz. It's a very popular and I think it's excellent, actually, personally, form of psychotherapy that is based in family systems and parts. It's based in parts work, which Jung, so that was my point, is Jung was a very big parts guy. So from Jung's standpoint, he talked about something called the Eros Gamos, which is the divine marriage. And it's about that synthesis between the sun and the moon, between the masculine and feminine inside of us. So that is why I can't really, there are 144 permutations of just that combination. Wow. And it also really has a lot to do with our families of origin in two different ways. First of all, our families have their own charts. And so certain things are kind of crowded out, like if you have, like in my family, everybody was air and fire, and I was the only earth person. My mom had some water, but I was the only earth person. And let me tell you, that felt really true. So in that way, our families influence us in terms of their charts, but also what they, shadow is what we perceive as receiving shame. And it starts in our families of origin. It's what we see in the environment as shaming that makes us hide stuff away. And so that's another way that, looking at our charts is one really important thing, but looking at our charts in the context of our family environment and how it's basically like, it's the filter that we filter all the ancestral and intergenerational and down to our families of origin. We filter it through our chart. And actually lots of people say, and I'm one of them, I would totally say, I believe this for sure. A lot of people say that we pick our charts. We pick our charts and our exact moments of birth to help us get through all the stuff we're going to have to get through.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. It's like a kaleidoscope where you're throwing in all these different colors and shapes. And as the twists and turns through life, you get these different patterns and combinations, and they affect each other. The little pieces of the kaleidoscope kind of like fall onto each other as they're moving. And so it affects the dynamic and how the light comes through, what's overlapping and what's transparent. And yeah, it's very, very rich system. So
what a beautiful way to put it.
Oh,
I love that
you.
because it's so true when you look at like the bigger picture transits, the things that are going on. I think that's actually exactly it. As you were saying it, it felt like it was opening up in exactly the way a kaleidoscope does. It just was, that's a perfect descriptor because it is very, 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 very layered from each of our individual birth charts to, we're parts of systems and the ways that the cosmos are interacting and all the way up to the giant collective world transits that are affecting all of us. I mean, it really is this like just like fractals.
And those images are so important. When we were growing up in school, they would show us the solar system like peas on a plate. So it's this very static going around, but when you see computer graphics of how it really is, we're all traveling through space and we have these, strange, big and smaller, tighter whirls around as we're progressing, like let's say up or whatever in a uniform direction. But then there's also the circular, so you have this kind of like masculine, straight as an arrow, but feminine, swirling and spiraling around while that's all happening. And it's a much more dynamic system than we kind of picture. And I think that those images really help influence our belief structure, how we interact with one another, all of these things. So fascinating. I know I could go on and on with you about the structure of all this, but I would love to tie it in to intuition or to helpers, healers, and guides, or messages from the heart, if you wouldn't mind speaking about that a little bit.
I would love to. And actually, that's a perfect segue into talking about my dogs because they are so close to my heart. This is perfect. So one of the things that I have found with my having pets over the course of my life. So I have to have a disclaimer for all the people out there who are not fans of breeders. I totally understand. Absolutely have. It's funny, actually, that my ex-husband and I got our first two dogs, and my husband now and I got our dog now, and we actually tried to go through a breeder shelter, and it was COVID, and so we couldn't get one.
Oh.
Every time we would reach out, nobody would get back to us, and then it would be like 3 weeks later, and they'd be like, "That dog is gone." We're like, "Yeah, no kidding." But the upshot of having gotten dogs from breeders is that I know their birth dates. And so
you can do their charts.
Right? Which is, it's been so funny. It's been so funny. So I'll first talk about my two beloved older dogs, which have both passed on now. That actually, so my husband now and I got together when they were still very much alive and had a lot of life left. And he actually fit with them too, which is really funny. So they both had so I have my moon in Taurus. So I have my Capricorn, Sun and Rising, and my moon in Taurus. So both of my dogs had Taurus suns, which was not totally coincidental. I knew when we were getting them, I knew what their sun signs would be, but I didn't look up their moon signs until later. Mm-hmm. And so one of them had a Taurus moon like me. So we already had the conjunction between her sun and my moon. And then we also had the same moon, which is really important, especially with Taurus. The moon is exalted in Taurus, which there's some fancy mathematic calculation that makes it that so, but it's said that Taurus moon is the most psychic moon because it's in its exaltation. So I have had a joke for a very long time that everybody I know who also has Taurus moon, I joke that we're on the Taurus moon network. And there really is kind of a weird psychic connectivity that I find, especially with other people or dogs with the Taurus moon. So that first dog had a Taurus moon. The other one, her brother, had his moon in Capricorn. So your sun sign. Yep, exactly. So we had these incredible beneficial conjunctions, and his sun was Taurus. So my moon. So we had these great conjunctions.
Right. They were born the same day, the same month. So they
were actually 2 years apart, but they were both. Yeah, this is part of the crazy synchronicity, by the way.
So they weren't the same litter.
No, they were from different litters, same breeder. They had the same mom and different dads, but they were brother and sister, and they were like this their whole lives. They were frick and frack. And so my husband comes on the scene while they're still young, and he's got his Taurus rising. So he matches up with both of them with the Taurus, and he, loved both of them immensely, just as much as I did. And now our current dog. So one quick thing about those two, they each lived to be 13 years and 8 months old. And they were so Annie, the first one, was 4,990 days on the planet. And Bogey, the second one, was 4,992.
Oh my God.
Almost had put him down 2 days earlier. So they literally had, and this was all later. I realized, wow, they're both 13 years and 8 months. And then I went to this, that time and date site and put it in, and I was like,
Blown away by the days. That's incredible.
right? I knew those two were connected, but I didn't realize they were connected like that. And so, yeah, the conjunctions between them too. That was the other thing that was so amazing, finding out, Bogey's moon is Capricorn to Annie's Taurus. They're both Earth. They're like, they were so connected. So fast forward to today, our dog now, and we didn't have a choice exactly about what exact time she was, we knew when the dog was pregnant, but we did not have, it was one of those things that was moment by moment. You didn't know when the dog was going to go into labor. And on the day, it changes rising signs every couple hours. But what we ended up getting was our girl, who's amazing. We love her so much. And she has a Taurus moon. So like mine.
Mm-hmm.
And we are it is so funny how much we read each other's minds. I'll be talking to her. She gets mad at me a bunch. She's like pretty, the rest of her signs, she has an Aries sun and then a Leo rising. And so she's a pretty spicy girl, even though she's very, very sweet, but I will talk to her, and it won't be until I get something right that she will like give me a kiss or like lean into me. Like she knows exactly what I'm saying. It is so funny. And I watch her. There are times where I'll say something that I know she's thinking, and she looks at me like she's surprised that I knew it, but I got it right. It's just so funny. So my husband has a Taurus rising, like I said, a Leo moon and an Aquarius sun. And so he and Zita have two really strong conjunctions. And it was so because his moon, her rising, and then her moon and his rising. It was just so random that it worked out that way, because any other time she would have been born, any other day, it wouldn't have worked out like that.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so many of us don't even know. We're just walking around kind of clueless about all these things. It's so fascinating. I could go on and on with you, but we are coming to the end of our time. So I'm just wondering if there anything else that you'd like to share about your work, or advice that you'd like to share with people. Something about maybe healing or guidance.
Yes, I would love to. I mean, my summit is making me think of all kinds of things about that, I really hope that I see it happening, actually. I really hope people continue to open their minds to the fact that, everything starts out as something that we don't understand until it, and who knows, astrology might be so big that we never really understand exactly how it works. We just kind of can behold it and see that it does. I don't think we'll ever be able to capture the way that it works. It's synchronicity. I don't think that's real. I think you can't capture it beyond knowing that it's that. But there are so many things that are trying to help us heal, move forward, get through things, have compassion and acceptance for ourselves, for other people, and to believe that it's not random, that things are there's some kind of order, someone's paying attention. And I think astrology is such an incredible ancient system. I think that that's what it's been doing here all along. Honestly, I think that there has been a way that the reason we've loved it so much is because it helps us feel like we can get it. We can, not that we can, ever not be struggling to, in certain ways, we're human, we're here on Earth, in Earth school and going through what we have to go through, but everything wants to help us. There is constantly so much that's available to us to tap into, and you really have to trust your own inner guidance system to be able to know when to look where, to know when to tap in. It's just, there's no shortcut to it. No book you read is going to teach you how to do it, other than to teach you that you really have to look inward. And I think that astrology is one of those things that if you approach it with an open mind and an open heart, it can help be a balm for that same kind of sense of connectedness that tends to, for me, this is true. I don't know if you would agree with this, but for me, that connectedness is always what soothes me. If I can just feel a sense of connectedness again, if I'm in a really tough space, just some connection is, I mean, it's really everything in those moments. And I think that astrology really, really makes that so seeable.
Beautiful. The word that's coming to mind for me is benevolence. That it's not random, that things are benevolent, that they tilt towards, not that we don't have struggles and lose our way, but that we aren't alone, and that there is a friendliness that's underneath, kind of gently guiding the stream. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. We all hit rough water and go backwards and get tumbled, but that's not the whole story, and it's not random either. So yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom. I hope that people have been inspired, and maybe they'll check things out now in a different sort of way and get some guidance. So thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much, Lori. It was a pleasure, as usual, to get to talk with you.
Yes. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website for podcast and resources at hopshealingtips.com. You can also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and is not providing healthcare advice. Please seek guidance from your professional healthcare team should you need assistance.